Welcome and Merry Christmas from Beneath the Bible, where we're helping you dig deeper and uncover the world beneath the sacred book. Today we're wrapping up Season 1 on our YouTube channel by examining the mystery of the Star of Bethlehem. What was it? Why did it behave so strangely? How did the wise men who lived far from Bethlehem know what to do when they saw it? If you want to know more about the wise men or Magi, be sure to check out last week's video right here. Now, let's take a closer look at the Star of Bethlehem. The Bible gives us four perspectives on the life of Jesus in the New Testament: the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Of those four Gospels, only two tell the story of the birth of Jesus: Matthew and Luke. Notably, they don't give us the exact same story. As we see throughout these Gospels, they each highlight different elements in the birth story that they think are important for their audience. The story of the Magi and the Star of Bethlehem, for example, only appears in Matthew's Gospel. And for such a famous story, it only takes up 12 verses. Now, this is a really peculiar passage that has led to a lot of questions about who the Magi are and what exactly is the Star of Bethlehem. So, what do we know about this star from Matthew's Gospel and from sources beyond the Bible? Let's start by looking at our source, the Gospel of Matthew. The birth narrative in Matthew begins: After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." Now, the Herod in this story is Herod the Great. He was the Roman-appointed sort of Jewish ruler of Judea. Later in the Gospels, Herod's sons, also named Herod, are involved in some of the political machinations during the ministry of Jesus. Historical sources tell us that Herod the Great was a cruel ruler, predisposed to paranoia about others trying to overthrow his power. So he was predictably upset when these Magi told him that they had come to see the new king who had been born. Herod consulted the scribes and priests in Jerusalem, and citing Matthew chapter 5, they told him that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. Herod relayed this message to the Magi and, after asking about the star they saw, asked for them to tell him where they find the Messiah, presumably so that he could go worship as well. The story concludes: After the Magi had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. You can see just from this passage that this star appears to be doing some unusual things. The Magi first saw the star when it rose, which isn't unusual. They got their bearings and set off for Jerusalem. But when they get there, the star goes ahead of them and stops over the place where the child Jesus was. Not the kind of behavior we would expect from a star. What's going on here, and how can modern scholarship help us understand the Star of Bethlehem?
Again, this passage in Matthew is the only place where the story of the star and the Magi is recorded. We have these 12 verses to help us figure out what the Star of Bethlehem was. There are, however, plenty of non-biblical Greco-Roman sources that might help illuminate this mystery, as well as contributions from the modern field of astronomy. So what do scholars think the Star of Bethlehem actually was? Efforts by modern astronomers to trace back particular astronomical events like comets or meteor showers haven't turned up anything conclusive. It's not for a lack of trying, though. There's an incredibly long history of suggestions for what kind of celestial phenomenon is behind this story. Part of the challenge is that it's not even clear what specific phenomenon astronomers should be looking for. The text in Matthew makes it sound like the Star of Bethlehem is like a spaceship that moves here and there and seems to settle even over a particular house. There are no known astronomical phenomenon that fit that bill unless it is describing something in a way we wouldn't expect or aren't familiar with. Astronomers have suggested astrological events like a nova or supernova, comets, asteroids, planetary conjunctions as all are possibilities for what the Star of Bethlehem could have been. The challenge is then to try and find something which we know occurred or plausibly occurred between the years 8 and 6 BC, the general range of dates during which Jesus is believed to have been born. While we could highlight many of these different theories, we just want to discuss one explanation which has to do with astrology and planetary conjunctions. This particular theory requires the Magi to be practitioners of Hellenized astrology, which combines Babylonian and Greek astrological theories. We do suspect that these Magi were astrologers, so it makes sense to examine an astrological phenomenon rather than the kind of celestial events that would be recognized by modern astronomers. This is supported by things like the phrase rising in the east, which is an astrological phrase meaning a helical rising. So the Magi, recognizing a star rising in the east, are recognizing an astrologically significant episode. Now, it has been suggested is that a particular astrological phenomena occurred on the morning of April 17th, 6 BC. This event is called a helical rising of Jupiter in Aries. I'm sure you, like me, are asking, what on earth is that? On this point, I'm going to quote at length the astronomer Peter Barthel, so I don't mess up the explanation. This can be found in his article, What If Anything, in the book The Star of Bethlehem and the Magi. We've included the reference in the description below. Dr. Barthel writes that this particular event includes, quote, massing of all of the planets and the luminaries, the sun and the moon, in and around the ascending male sign of Aries, Saturn and Jupiter preceding the sun, and the upcoming or daytime occultation of the regal planet Jupiter by the new moon. The early hours of 17 April most likely saw the 6 BCE helical rising of Jupiter. A helical rising represents the first dawn that a planet is far enough away from the slowly moving sun to be seen again. According to Hellenistic astrology, Jupiter and nearby Saturn were seen as the spear-bearers of the sun. As Helen confirmed, these conditions indeed have a royal birth portent. During the course of that year, the regal planet moved through Aries, reached Taurus, where it stood still for a week in August, reversed its course back into Aries, and stood still again for a week in Aries in December. The reason for this peculiar motion is very basic and relates to the fact that Jupiter, like Mars and Saturn, is an outer planet, further from the sun than the Earth is. All revolving around the sun with virtually circular orbits having increasingly larger radii. Once every 12 to 13 months, the Earth overtakes distant Jupiter and Saturn, causing an apparent retrograde motion of these planets in their momentary constellations. So now that that's clear, what Dr. Barthel is saying, this helical rising in Jupiter and Aries would have been noted by astrologers in Mesopotamia as a celestial phenomenon to their east. Since they were observing planets, these objects could move, allowing for the Star of Bethlehem to move and lead them to their destination. Within the received wisdom of Hellenized astrology, this would have been interpreted as a portent of kingly proportions, as this is an exceedingly rare event, occurring once every 30 decades. So the astronomy on this seems pretty solid, and the movements of these celestial bodies could certainly have been known to ancient stargazers. They kept incredibly detailed calendars which noted and predicted just these kinds of events. But keep in mind, this is just one theory among many, many theories. Now, another theory worth considering is that there was no historical Star of Bethlehem. Most scholars see the Star of Bethlehem as an element of the story added by Matthew. While that may sound problematic, keep in mind our discussion of historiography from the last video. This would have been well within acceptable bounds for Matthew's audience, even if there was no actual, or as we would call it, historical event like the Star of Bethlehem. The appearance of celestial oddities at events of great importance is a mainstay of ancient literature, so Matthew's addition of this detail would serve to communicate the cosmic importance of Jesus' birth. Now, there's precedent for this in other ancient literature. For example, a, quote, long-haired star, probably a comet, was described as appearing at the birth of King Mithridates VI, a king of Pontus, which is a kingdom in what is now Turkey. He was a very powerful and dynamic king who was really the last king in the area to threaten Rome and Rome's conquest. A Roman historian wrote, quote, even the heavenly bodies in their manifestation predicted his future greatness. For in both the year in which he was born and the year in which he began to reign, a long-haired star shone for 70 days, so that the entire sky seemed to blaze. In its greatness, it filled a quarter of the heavens, and with its brilliance it outshone the sun." End quote. Now, to our modern sensibilities, this is not plausible. It's also not astronomically possible. A comet that filled a quarter of the sky and was brighter than the sun. But for the ancient historian, Mithridates VI was such an important figure that there ought to be important signs surrounding momentous occasions in his life. If the heavens impact our daily lives, as everyone in the ancient world assumed, then surely such an important figure would have heavenly signs pointing to that significance. Comets in particular, according to later magical hermetic texts, were portents of great change and pointed to major happenings in the cosmos. The first century Jewish historian Josephus says that a sword-shaped star was over Jerusalem before the city was conquered, and that a comet flew over the city for a whole year. Similar stories are recorded by the Roman historians Plutarch and Diodorus of Sicily. Again, these seem implausible to modern audiences, but these authors were writing to an ancient audience that would have no problem with such astronomical phenomenon marking important events. One scholar has said, the registers of plausibility have changed between ancient and modern audiences. Now, in the ancient world, strange or unique celestial sightings would almost be expected for the birth of someone like Jesus. Throughout his gospel, Matthew emphasizes the kingship of Jesus, so the addition of this detail of a star marking his birth would serve to further his rhetorical point. Moreover, if the helical rising of Jupiter and Aries theory is accurate, then this is further enhanced by Magi recognizing the astrological significance.
Just like we saw last week when we looked at the visit of the Magi, examining the background of the Star of Bethlehem helps us understand that Matthew is writing within a wider Greco-Roman historiographical tradition. The modern distinctions we make between fact and myth are much blurrier for ancient historians, and Matthew is no exception. To ancient readers, it wouldn't have been a problem for Matthew to insert details that we might not consider historically accurate in order to advance the purpose for which he is writing. Now, like we said in the last video, Matthew writes in order to convince his readers that Jesus is the Messiah of Israel and that his arrival has ushered in a new age in which membership in God's people is available to all people through Jesus. The inclusion of astrological markers at the birth of Jesus would have been something Matthew's first century readers expected if Jesus really was who Matthew claimed he was. Astrological signs marked important cosmic events, often around regime change and the birth of kings. We've seen many other examples of this in ancient literature already. By including these details in his narrative about Jesus' birth, Matthew is purposefully pitting Jesus against these other rulers. Through his gospel, he demonstrates Jesus' superiority to these other rulers and the nature of Jesus' kingdom, in contrast to the kingdoms of the world. So again, like we said in the Magi video, the significance of the Star of Bethlehem and those who recognize it is more important for Matthew and his readers than whether or not those events took place in history. Now, I think we should read them the same way, not dismissing questions of history, but understanding that Matthew has more important questions for us to ask. Matthew is telling us important things about Jesus, even if they aren't historical. So we can still ask questions like, what does this tell us about Jesus, without certainty about the historicity of these events. Matthew is telling us that even the stars in the heavens recognize the entry of their Creator into His creation, that they portend the world-changing life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, and that we can recognize the magnitude of Jesus' birth as well. In this Christmas season, that's what we recognize and celebrate, that the Savior of the world has been born, and the world has fundamentally changed because of it. Thanks for joining us for this Beneath the Bible video and for all of Season 1 on our YouTube channel. If you're interested in learning more about this topic, we've included some references and resources in the description below. That does bring us to the end of Season 1. Philip and I are going to take off the month of January to get more great videos ready for you in the spring. Look for new videos starting in February and be sure you're subscribed so you don't miss when those new videos start rolling out. Also in January, we're going to be posting videos of a 3-week message series that Philip and I got to do at our church this past summer. We explored the ancient Israelites' views of creation, the temple, and altars, and how understanding the sacred world of ancient Israel can help us read the Bible better today. The first of those videos will be right here in a couple of weeks. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more content like it, take some time to look back through our videos from Season 1 and follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Beneath the Bible. If you learned something new today, take a minute to share this video with your friends. And until next time, keep digging.